Hi everyone and welcome to Riskologists. This podcast is brought to you by Optimise and hosted by me, Pat Bradshaw.
And me, Nicola Boyle. Optimise are thrilled to host this podcast series where we'll be speaking with some of risk management's most respected and esteemed thought leaders from across the UK and beyond.
Throughout Season 3, we'll be exploring our guest journey within risk management, as well as exploring key conversations and topics around the overarching theme of the season being the future of risk management.
Our goal is to create a platform in which ideas and thoughts can be shared in order to inspire and educate our audience, and to ultimately give back to the risk management community across the world.
So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of Riskologists. As always, I'm your host Pat Bradshaw.
And I'm your co-host Nicola Boyle. Welcome Charlotte, thanks for coming along and agreeing to come on to the podcast. How are we feeling? Have you done something like this before?
I've done a few before. I think a few people might have heard me talk about risk management professionally, either at conferences or on podcasts.
I definitely have. I think that was one of the reasons that I reached out to you in the first instance, because I've seen how brilliant you've been on podcasts before.
No pressure then.
Yeah, there's no pressure. So just jumping straight into it, journey to date then. I think it's always really useful to understand how people have come to where they are in this particular point in the career. As most people know, and as the guests we've had previously tend to just fall into risk management. I think of the umpteen guests we've had on, I think only one person actually did risk management at university and started out of the career in risk. So really interested to hear how you got into risk, a bit of a background of your life. It can be as detailed or as vague as you like, but yeah, fire away.
So I'm yet another one of those people who's just fallen into a risk management role. But I have a unique blend of backgrounds. I originally trained to be a solicitor. Unfortunately, the risk was that we had a recession. So then I reevaluated what I wanted to do in my career. I became a quantity surveyor. Also not my best choice of career in a recession. Then I became a legal consultant, and that's when I started doing claims management. So the negative side of risk management when it becomes an issue. And I did that for a few years, and yes, I have been made redundant 3, possibly 4 times, so I've got a very bouncy career, but at the root of it has always been risk management. So how I became purely a risk manager is I was up for redundancy, and they said, do you know stuff about risk? And I was managing my current employer at the time, their risk register for PI claims. And I said, well, I update this risk register. I'll have a go. And because of my commercial background and legal background, my first project was a £4 billion offshore wind farm. So nothing like starting in the deep end. From that, I realised I actually really liked risk management. And as a result, I've worked for small consultancies. I've worked for large consultancies. And I've been very fortunate because of my mix of education that I've been able to work in renewables, nuclear, water treatment, rail, highways, essentially any large project that we've had in the UK, I've had a role to play, including some of the Olympic Games. And now I've set up my own consultancy, as I thought I'd be big and brave and do it alone. And I currently work out in Ireland supporting the aviation sector. Oh,
lovely. I think I've mentioned on the podcast before having a bit of a convoluted background, I should say. Actually, stands you in good stead because I only got into risk management like 4 years ago. And I did like sales and marketing and stuff like that before. And I think obviously the theory is really important, but I think a lot of risk management is sort of managing people and understanding people. And obviously we're going to touch on that a little bit today. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I think honestly, without like having worked in some really tough industries like recruitment and sales and stuff where people don't really like to talk to you, to be honest, don't really like you, gets you a bit of a thicker skin. It's it really sets you up quite nicely. It's how did you find that? Because I actually did law at uni as well. I had no intention of being a lawyer. I don't know if you share the same sentiment, but.
No, I went to law school. I actually did everything. I was going to be a commercial property lawyer, but commercial property and a recession don't mix.
Yeah. I was sorry to jump in, but I was just going to say, do you think having that commercial and legal background, do you think that's really helped with being a risk manager?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a mix because obviously in construction, we have our NEC contract, and everything links back to risk. Everything in the project does. And I've been able to sort of explain and negotiate better with a project manager because of my sort of three-dimensional education, not just being able to do risk management. Because actually, sorry, spoiler alert, it's the easier element to teach than legal or how to construct a tunnel. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, it's from your experience, did you like, because I sometimes, like I say, it's been a minute since I graduated from uni, it was like 2015, and there's times where I think, oh God, I couldn't even tell you some of the stuff that I learned at uni, and then there's other stuff like you say when you go through like contracts, NEC stuff, and I like just pluck something out of thin air and I'm like, God, where the hell did that come from? Are you like quite cognizant of all of the information that you've retained over the years, or do you ever find yourself in that sort of situation?
I find it really amusing that the topic I was worst at uni and at law school was contract law. Yeah. And it's how I make my money now. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't my favourite topic. I think it was something to do with a 9 a.m. lecture on a Wednesday, and that was the only reason I had to be on campus. So it wasn't top priority for me. That
was exactly the same for me in land law. 9 o'clock on a Wednesday. I think I might have been to about 3 in 12 months. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, just looking into the podcast episode, then it's no secret from the title, we'll be looking at the art of manipulation. Quite a provocative title, the nudge technique. I think we were having a conversation before we started about the word manipulation versus a couple of other things like persuasion and parenting even. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Charlotte, if touching on why you think I guess why you chose this topic. Is it something you're particularly passionate about? I know, at least I've seen on social media, this is something that you've discussed previously, and yeah, it's really quite interesting.
So really, why I focus on this is whilst we've got all of the improvements to automate elements of the risk management process, we fundamentally still deal with humans. And I think with all of these improvements, we actually need to fine tune our interpersonal and, I don't like the term people skills or soft skills, because I don't believe they're soft. They're actually really fundamental to what we do as risk professionals. So the nudge technique is one element of behavioural science. I've started looking into behavioural science a lot more. Most risk managers will have been encouraged at some point to read Thinking Fast and Slow. If you haven't, I would really recommend it because it explains how humans behave. Once you understand how humans behave, you can then go on to the next step. I just think it's so important to understand the human element of risk management now when all the other elements can be automated or AI can be used. There's still elements like judgment and understanding of human beings that it's going to be a long time before the AI solutions can fix that.
No, exactly. Yeah. I think like day one, everyone at Optimise will say this, that you obviously go for ISO 31000, you look at the wheel and stuff, and the thing we get taught is above anything else is human and cultural factors. You can have the best tech, you can have best available information, but it's all pretty redundant without the people.
Yeah. I think it always does come back to the people, especially with obviously the topic of future of risk management. A lot of people always probably gear towards AI and artificial intelligence and the technology sort of side to it, but when you actually think about it, you still need the people. So the people are part of the process. If you could just start explaining sort of what the nudge technique is, and sort of how it differs from other forms of persuasion or, as we said, manipulation.
Ooh. So it's going to be difficult to explain this succinctly. So behavioural science is how we make decisions. So there is elements that inform our decisions. Some of them are biases that we probably want to explore separately. But like I said, Thinking Fast and Slow, we have our fast memory that basically protects us. But then our slow thinking is when nudge techniques are probably more effective. So a nudge is essentially something to encourage a predictable behaviour. So it could be physical, it could be a procedure. There's lots of different elements. And there is the Nudge book by Thaler. But all these books are great, and I'm not going to say that any of them are not relevant, but they're all very theoretical. What risk professionals really need is a method of getting the theory into practice and how it applies to their day job.
Yeah.
Because these two books are really thick. They're really interesting, but you're not going to get a how-to guide at the end.
Yeah. Agreed.
Lovely. So I guess just jumping ahead a little bit then, I don't want to preempt any of the things that we might be discussing in the future, but can you give people any examples of sort of maybe organisations that nudge the general public? if that makes sense.
Yeah, so nudge technique is used all around us. You probably don't notice it happening. A really common one, and it's a good example to use, is about plastic tax and recycling shopping bags, etc. So the nudge techniques have been used because you have either default you have to pay, or an incentive that if you don't have to use one of the ones from the supermarket, you get a discount. You're actively encouraged not to buy more plastic bags. So that's a very subtle nudge technique.
Yeah.
And it works, because when it was first introduced, yes, lots of times we'd go to the supermarket and we'd forget. But then we'd get sick of having to pay every single time that we were there. So we remember to bring the bag. So that means there's less plastic going into landfill. So it's everywhere. Some are more obvious than others.
Yeah.
Another example would be when you go onto a website, cookies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is always a default at the bottom that is pretty much selected. You just have to press it once more to say you accept them, and then you're tracked. But you've actually volunteered into that. They've just given you the nudge to go down that route. So yeah, they're everywhere, not just in risk management.
Is the manipulation side of things there the fact that they've tailored the word tracker to cookie to sort of, or is that slightly different?
I'd say you could argue it's manipulation if you don't understand the true intent.
Okay.
It's very, very clear you need to know the intent, otherwise nudges could be seen as quite manipulative.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily the intent of them.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, just on the, obviously people can probably tell from the title of the episode, we've sort of chosen the art of manipulation to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Obviously manipulate is a pretty pertinent adjective for what the nudge technique is trying to achieve, as you've mentioned. Obviously persuasion and even parenting, and I'm sure there's several other adjectives that you could use. I guess if we're focused on the word manipulate, which has relatively negative connotations, how can we use the nudge technique ethically applied in P3 space or enterprise risk management for that matter to influence decision making without actually crossing those ethical boundaries in inverted commas?
Explain the intent. So what you would be doing mainly in risk management is normally to encourage engagement and improve risk culture. So if you explain all the benefits, people are more likely to participate. We don't like being forced down a route. We as human beings, we just don't like it. So if you've been forced to go to a risk workshop, you don't participate as well as you should do. But if we use some of the nudges and explain why you need to be doing it, you're more likely to participate and understand the value.
Yeah.
So it's all about communication.
Yeah. So that word manipulate, I think sometimes that might be interpreted that you're sort of encouraging or manipulating someone to do something without their at least cognizance of it. So do you think that's not necessarily the best tact?
It's not, and sometimes the word manipulate has negative connotations.
Yeah.
But essentially making one human do something they weren't intending to is manipulation.
Yeah.
It's just that generally we associate manipulation with criminal activity,
Yeah,
negativity.
of course. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, cool. So in terms of, I guess, the practitioners of risk who are listening to this, that hopefully their ears have perked up a little bit, and we've
Caught their attention.
Yeah, caught their attention. We've definitely caught mine. What are some sort of common scenarios in risk management specifically, or maybe project management, not necessarily risk, where a well-placed nudge could actually lead to a pretty good outcome or a better outcome?
So I've come prepared for this one.
Happy days. That's what we like to hear.
No, I've come prepared because when I've spoken about it before, it's all about making practical scenarios for this.
Yeah.
So there's a technique. It is not my technique. The government decided that it's great having all these books on behavioural science, but we need a practical one. The technique's called mind space, and every single letter in that word is a potential nudge, and you can choose to use one, none, several, all at one go. But the one that I would So we'll link it more to a risk management scenario. This is about getting improved engagement. So M is for messenger, and that's about using risk champions. It all depends on who you choose to be your risk champions. If it's no disrespect to people being the admin, the PM admin team, they are not the best placed people. You want people who are absolutely passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
And also peers of your senior project managers, your project directors, so that they can see that actually there is some value in the message being delivered to them. But then that also goes into, we have norms. We all like to be the same. We all want to feel included and belonging. So if you find out all the project directors, they've been doing monthly risk reviews, you want to do a monthly risk review. So you start communicating through the risk champions and through some stats that actually everyone else has been doing them. Why haven't you? So it could be even actions is a bugbear of mine. People are great at coming up with actions, terrible at completing them.
Yeah.
Or nudge them on 30 days. 30 days.
Push out a month.
And it doesn't solve anything, and it doesn't give them any impetus. So what I will normally do with my PMs is say, okay, don't give me 30 days. Give me 3 months in the future. And then we have a weekly meeting, and they get named and shamed if they're over, or you're due in 30 days, and it starts making them want to be one of the team.
Yeah.
And you can do league tables, say who's got the highest amount. So these are all nudge techniques in reality. And they're not manipulative. They're just nudging. Unfortunately, the term nudge comes up quite a lot. It's just moving the behaviour along through not nagging, not harassment, but just, why don't you do this? Or do you want to feel vulnerable? Most of us don't. So it plays on a lot of our human behaviours.
Yeah.
We don't like negativity.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's almost in some instances, well, at least how I interpreted, like trying to encourage people to get a bit of FOMO. if they're not involved.
No, that is a really good method to do it. Like, oh, look at all these guys, they've got all this. And then in turn, it improves the risk management behaviours, and actually they action their actions. They start participating actively in the process instead of it being done to them. Yeah.
No, definitely. And I've said to the Optimise guys and some of the internal processes we have, which we've sort of amended over time, that I certainly feel I wouldn't dream of turning up to something where there's an expectation that I'm going to be held accountable for something. And my worst nightmare is turning up and having to say, oh, sorry, I've not got something. So like you say, that FOMO, that sort of almost making sure people know that they're going to be held to account. People don't want to be put in a situation where they're made to look a bit daft. Not daft necessarily, but they're going to be made to look like they've not done what they've said they were going to do, and they're going to be held accountable.
Very much.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it sounds like as well there's sort of an element of, I don't want to say hierarchy, but if it's coming from like senior level, do you think that sort of filters more as well with the nudge technique?
It sometimes backfires.
Yeah.
Because just because your boss says so doesn't mean you want to.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really key to get risk champions and sort of cheerleaders for risk.
Yeah.
At
so not
sort of the right
necessarily.
levels. They don't have to all be the senior partners, because actually they've got a different reason to care to why you need to care. They know they could go to court. You, at the end of the day, you're completely, risk-free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I feel like when I first started researching it, I felt like it was going to be like a really, obviously it is really interesting technique, really like groundbreaking, but it feels like people listening to this might actually think, oh, I've been nudged, or I've been nudging since time immemorial. Like it's been happening since day dot.
Absolutely, that happened to me. So I realised that that's why I use the term parenting.
Yeah.
Your parents will suggest options to you, and you think you've made that decision, but you haven't. Someone has nudged you along to make a healthier choice, or to take a certain course because, these are the benefits. And I'm going to use one of the ones that it gets me every time someone does this to me. If they say they're disappointed.
Oh, God, yeah, it's awful.
That is a nudge technique. You can say to people, I'm disappointed that you didn't attend your risk review. I'm disappointed that you haven't completed the action like you promised me. And that will get, I would say, 90% of the general public, unless you are actually a psychopath, I think that will get you. It gets me every time, and it doesn't matter how old you are. No one wants to have someone else disappointed in them.
No, of course. And going a little bit off piste as well, I think, I don't know if you've ever seen, well, I'm sure a lot of people listening will have seen Derren Brown and stuff. There's things where he's done, I remember one specific example where he like led this complete stranger into a toy shop and asked them to pick a toy, and all day there'd been like giraffe things on a bus going past him when he was like pointing to things. He was doing it in the shape of a giraffe, and then he picked a giraffe and he said, "I knew you were going to do that." I don't know. Is that nudging? Do you think?
I think it's elements of it.
Yeah.
It's suggesting. So it's like goes on to another one on this salience. So it's relevance to where you are. So because the giraffe has been mentioned all those times, you go into a shop, you've got giraffe at the back of your mind.
Yeah.
So it is a nudge technique. There are also sort of ways of changing behaviour. So that behaviour was, he knew what he wanted this individual to buy and just put all the nudges as the steps before they got there.
And they think they've made the decision.
Yeah.
It sort of lines up this question quite nicely. So I was just going to say, what sort of psychological principles underpin the nudge technique?
Oh, that's possibly a little beyond my skill set, but it's a lot on behavioural science, bias, perception to risk, because we all talk about, you must do the process, but actually why?
Yeah.
So if you've never had a bad experience, why do you care? Yeah.
So is there certain like biases or heuristics that sort of come into play, or sort of maybe jeopardize the effectiveness of the nudge?
I'm going to ask you a question now. How many biases do you believe there is? Cognitive biases and
God, according to the literature, hundreds.
Precisely, so I'm going to say, I'm going to narrow it down.
Yeah.
So I think there is a few biases. I'm going to do ones that are very relevant and then one that's sort of my favourite. It's not relevant though. So anchoring, we do it during quantitative analysis. If you've got a team that aren't really that comfortable and you start saying, is it 10K? They'll go, yeah. And nothing ever gets too much higher than 10K or too much less than 10K. How I counteract that is I actually come up with ridiculous numbers and say, so like 6 million, but Charlotte, the project's only 2. Okay, then you tell me why it can't be. So that's my way of stopping them being anchored by me.
Yeah.
Risk managers are potentially very dangerous in those environments because we can do it. Confirmation bias. People will go with that information supports what I want to do, so there is no other information. Risk managers need to be very aware of it. We can't fix any of these biases, but we have to be very, very aware of it. Otherwise, we've actually put some bias into the risk management process unintentionally. Then we have gambler's fallacy. So because things have happened previously, it's going to happen like that in the future. I think project managers suffer quite a lot from this, and the risk management process has the potential to feed it. Yeah. And then I'm going to give you my favourite bias, because I just find it hilarious that if you go onto Wikipedia, you'll find this bias. The IKEA bias.
Really?
Okay, so the IKEA bias is essentially because you've made it, you think it's good.
Right, okay.
And most of us have tried to put together IKEA furniture. We've never quite done it well, but we're so proud of ourselves that we won't admit that it's not as good as it could have been. So that's completely irrelevant, but I just find it really amusing there's so many biases that impact us on a daily basis. And lots of it is to do with how we've been brought up. So it's stuff we can't change. So when using nudge techniques, we have to be conscious of everyone else's biases, our own, the organisation we're working with. It's just being sort of like hyper aware that if you're going to do these nudge techniques, some people might react badly to them. Some people will just go along with it.
Yeah, I was going to say that I guess that sort of feeds into the whole personality types as well. If you've got like someone who's a red, who's very direct, sometimes can be quite intimidating, I guess, to people who I can never remember what they all are, but like a yellow or something, if they're a little bit more agreeable or something like that. I think, is that yellow? Or is that green?
Yellow. So yellows are potentially quite creative and energetic.
Yeah,
that's right.
Energetic.
Yeah.
I was going to say that.
But I've got a tinge of red. so I will get stuff done.
Yeah. So I feel like those sort of personality types, is that something that you'd be obviously bias and heuristics are things that you taught from day one in risk, that you need to acknowledge. In terms of personality types, is the people that you might build a relationship with in the project team, and you think they're gonna sort of not smell a rat, probably sounds worse than it actually is, but
no, it's exactly what you should do in any situation. Is you can't just use a cookie cutter system and think you use this list and absolutely everything's going to go well. You will fail at some point, and that's fine.
Yeah,
absolutely no problem with fail. I had a really good description of fail. First attempt in learning, and I think if the world was more positive like that, so there's no problem with failure if you have that as your description of it, because not all of these techniques will work. You're right with your red. Yeah, it's not going to work so well. It's be quick and be gone. But they actually are more likely to do the process because they see it as, well, I must do it. It's probably some of your less confident individuals that you need to bring along, or fear of them having fear of failure. They are the sort of people you need to bring along with the risk management process, because a good risk management culture means that you can actually tell people you've got a problem, not hide it.
Yeah.
So that would probably be where you'd focus your energy, on the people who are just a bit apprehensive.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that sort of answers the question that I was just about to ask. So it was, when can you identify when it's more appropriate to use a nudge rather than a direct approach? But I guess you sort of just answered that there, where it's sort of dependent on that person and their personality, or their sort of what bias heuristics that they're playing.
Yeah. It depends is the favourite answer to any
context is king.
Yeah, all about the person.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the flip side of the coin then, Charlotte, in your experience, are there any sort of pitfalls or unintended consequences using the nudge that you've from your own experience you've found you thought, oh God, that didn't go quite as I'd planned, or not necessarily things you've experienced, but things in the literature that you've read you thought, oh yeah, that's something that I need to be aware of?
It's not necessarily a risk management based one, but we came up with, when I got into this topic, it was part of my MBA, and we started doing real life examples, and it's about using incentives. So you can use an incentive, but you have to be really conscious of, if you're giving out prizes, does that fit with the company's culture? You can't necessarily give out money because of tax. You need to be really conscious of the whole ecosystem, because we had ideas that were like, well, just incentivize people to always do what they should do by, if you do it for a whole month, we'll put you into a raffle, which is gambling, and that's not necessarily in everyone's comfort zone. So you just need to be really careful about, well, the what ifs. So I suppose risk professionals, if we have the time, we have actually the advantage of, that's actually what we're trained to do, to go, but what?
Yeah, it's always the what if.
Yeah. I was just going to say, sorry Nick, I think we've already covered it, to be fair, but in terms of being very forthcoming and not trying to be underhand, I think when you learn things like, for example, organisations or companies online saying accept cookie, and they've used the word cookie instead of tracker to almost try and think, oh, that's like a nice word, and then when you learn that afterwards, there can be a bit of resentment. You can be like, oh, so yeah, that is something that you've sort of almost tricked me, if you like.
It's generational as well, that we've all grown up with the internet. I know that my parents will say, no, I don't want to accept, because tracking sounds really aggressive. I know we used cookies, but we all have a mobile phone. We've essentially all got a tracker on us. But it's about how it is communicated to us.
No, of course. Perfect. And then, sorry, Nick.
I was just going to ask, so just how do you measure the effectiveness of the nudge? Like, because it's sort of like a behavioural sort of element to it. So how is it
Can you
measured?
Afterwards go, there, got you?
It doesn't make you very friendly with the team, but that is a really good point, that you have to create a baseline. So you need to understand how many people, for example, were attending risk reviews, how many people were closing out actions. And then you can make a target for yourself of, I want to have a 5% uplift, and then you'll be able to track that because you'd have 2 data points.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So everything's trackable, but you do need a baseline.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to have environments where you can actually have, going back to science lessons now, your control environment and the nudge environment to actually see whether your nudge did it or it was just by nature people did it.
Yeah. Makes
like
sense.
a scenario almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's essentially scenario planning, and that's why it makes it so difficult to actually do experiments on nudge techniques, because you need these 2 groups and you need to make sure they don't talk to each other. And we all have phones, internet, email, so someone could say, oh, I got this email, what did you get? And it's really difficult to sort of define the 2 groups.
Yeah. Can you actually, I don't know if this is a bit of a daft question, but I was going to say nudging feels like it's something which would be much better facilitated in person. Can you nudge people via correspondence? Can you do that via email? Can you do it by
so when you don't pay a bill, I'm not implying that everyone doesn't pay their bills, the first email you get of, oh, your bill's late, there's your first nudge to go pay it. Then you'll normally get one afterwards saying, oh, we notice you still haven't paid, would you like any assistance? These are all nudges. We don't see it as that, we just see it as a company being really helpful. And if you continue to ignore it, it'll say something like, the first attempt, we believe it was just an oversight on your part. Now, if we don't hear from you in the next 2 weeks, we see this as a deliberate act and we will pursue you. You've seen the chain in law, in paying your bills. So you can do it by correspondence, but you have to play really hard on the disappointment, thoughts and feelings. But that is harder to do in personal communications. You might start using the individual's name instead of Mr. or Mrs. or Sir. Customer. Yeah, you'll start using the name to play on it. Or one of the examples that I found really interesting when I was looking into this is like, they'll say, oh, well, 90% of the residents in your area paid their bill on time. So then you feel really rubbish.
FOMO again.
Yeah, and literally it's all these things. And I didn't realise quite how obvious they all are around me until I started looking into nudge theory, and then realised everyone's trying to manipulate me in some way.
Yeah. It's really interesting you should say that, because I sort of a technique that I learned when I worked in recruitment, actually I still use now. For example, people that I used to reached out to the podcast about, I send them a really nice long message at first, and my technique was just get shorter and shorter, send a message like, I'm sorry, I appreciate you're really busy, blah blah blah, to the point where I would just send, so for example, you just put Charlotte ? And 9 times out of 10 they come back, oh, so sorry, Pat, I meant to come back to you sooner, blah blah blah.
Yeah, gets their attention.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So last couple of questions then, Charlotte. So I don't know if this one's a little bit overkill or if we've already covered it. I don't know if there's a way that you could necessarily police this, but is there a way that projects or organisations can ensure that the nudge aligns with their risk management strategy or their corporate values or things like that? Or is it quite difficult to police unless you're sort of sitting in on every sort of facilitation, every meeting, every email?
It's possible. Lots and lots of companies are now starting to have behavioural science departments to understand how they can improve not just their own staff experience, but how they can improve their projects. So there is more and more people taking the data to understand what's happening. Obviously, like everything, you can't police everything, but you've got records of most things. IT departments can always pull things when you need them. But it's done a lot more on trust than anything else.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Perfect. So thanks for that, Charlotte. So final question then. Do you see, again, I think when I wrote this question, I didn't have quite as much cognizance of how common it is. The question was going to be, do you see this becoming a more common practice as the discipline continues to develop? I think people are probably doing it subconsciously anyway. I guess I'll amend the question to, do you think people are going to be more cognizant that they're doing it?
I think people
or cognizant that it's being done to them. Sorry to interrupt.
I think people should be. I think if you are just starting your career, the tools, the techniques, they are great, but this is like a superpower that you can start nudging behaviours, improve engagement, become trusted advisors to senior management because they know that you have the right intent. So yeah, people will be doing it. I was going to say, you'll probably all realise that you've had it done to you recently.
Yeah, off the back of this episode, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, last but not least, so just keeping in with the riskologist tradition, we always kind of end the episode on a piece of advice that you'd like to give to your younger self or to a younger audience that are maybe just starting out in their career in risks, or anything that you're reflecting back on your career that you would like to have known when you started out.
Okay, so obviously, I don't know if this is filmed, by the way. I have quite a distinct appearance, and I'm not a shrinking violet. May surprise some. But what I would say is, I was told once, "Oh, you're a bit too much." Not too much. Wrong room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry.
Yeah.
Love that. I think you mentioned that when we were just talking prior to the actual recording. You say that are you naturally brunette? Because this is filmed, but if you're just listening to this, Charlotte has amazing. Is it pinky purple? I'm a little bit colourblind. So.
It's cyclamen.
Cyclamen.
Nice, yeah.
I've just been painting my house. It sounds like something you get at Valspar.
Yeah, it's a very vivid pink.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that for the first few years of your career, you sort of were you quite pink hair at uni? And
I had pink hair at law school because I was advised get it out your system, because, giving away a bit of my age, about 20 years ago, people did not have pink hair in professional jobs.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So it was basically going to be my ticket to not having a career was by having vibrant hair. So I got it out my system, then realised it doesn't really matter once you're established and people understand.
Love that.
Yeah.
No, absolutely love that. I think it ties in perfectly with your name, Candy, as well. That's how I always remembered it anyway.
That's coincidental.
Perfect. And then last but not least, if anybody wants to get in touch with you regarding, you've recently set up your own limited company, for anybody that wasn't aware, or if anybody wants to discuss the nudge technique with you in a bit more detail, what would be the best way for you to get in touch regarding either of those things?
I would get hold of me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find.
Perfect. Well, Charlotte, thanks so much for coming on. Honestly, it's been absolutely fascinating. Hopefully everyone who's listened has really enjoyed it as well, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Amazing.
Thanks, Charlotte. And that's it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode of Riskologists, be sure to follow Optimise and Riskologists on all of our social media channels, where you can subscribe to the podcast and be notified of every episode so you don't miss a thing.
Please like, share and leave reviews to help support us and increase our reach within the wider risk community.
And join us next time, where we'll be chatting with another leading figure in the world of risk.
Until then, thanks for listening and take it easy.